Welcome to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson and I ask my guests one simple question. Why? Focusing on the importance of why, I share with you the relatable, uplifting and inspiring conversations I have with people from all walks of life. This podcast will encourage you to focus on your why to enable and empower you to achieve the success you desire. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Before we get started, are you thinking of creating a podcast or are you a podcast host already? As a podcast strategist, I can help you to launch or relaunch a purposeful and profitable podcast which will inspire, entertain and educate a global audience. Simply book in a one-to-one call with me right now via the Calendly link in the show notes, and together we'll focus on the purpose of your podcast. Today on Focus on Why, I am joined by Jackie Handy. Welcome.
Hello. Nice to be back.
It is nice to be back. Now, 129, Unconscious Competence, was the last episode that we did together here on the show. And it's very rare that I have people back on the show. So it is a great privilege to have you back. But I know that there's a reason. So why don't we just dive straight in? And it's over to you, Jackie.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, first of all, I think the privilege is mine for being back and being allowed to come back. Thank you, Amy. Yeah, I walked the Camino de Santiago this year. And to be specific, this year, I walked between April 26th and June 7th of 2023. And for those people that are listening that perhaps aren't sure what the Camino de Santiago is, it is its origins, it's a pilgrimage. So it is a pilgrimage into Santiago, which is in northwest Spain. And it is a pilgrimage that follows the way of St. James. It's otherwise known as the way of St. James. And so it is believed that the remains of St. James, or certainly some of his remains, are interned in the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela. And so for really thousands of years, pilgrims have flocked to Santiago de Compostela in the cathedral there to pay their respects. Nowadays, the pilgrimage, I sort of say, quote unquote, the pilgrimage is one which people complete for very different reasons. It may be a religious pilgrimage for them, maybe a spiritual journey of sorts, or just a long walk. And people start from all over Europe and walk to Santiago. I started just across the French-Spanish border in a little place called Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port and walked the fundamentally 500 miles into Santiago over the course of 5 weeks, and then decided to carry on because why not? I was there. So I carried on for another 3 days and went to the coast. So I literally traversed one side of Spain to the other, which was pretty incredible. And so I thought, do you know what? Can I share more about this journey, because it really was quite a journey, and I'm still taking some of the lessons I think from that walk. So can I share that with somebody that I trust, that I know? And you were the person that sprang to mind. So yeah, I thought I'm going to reach out to Amy and see if I can talk to her about my journey, and of course your many listeners. So that's what.
Wow. So what did this particular journey mean for you, Jackie? Was it a spiritual one? Was it a long walk? What was the purpose of it?
Yeah, it was interesting because I think sometimes with something like this, it starts as one thing and maybe ends as another. So I turned 50. My last birthday is my 50th birthday. And whether there's something about reaching that point of life where you kind of think, right, there are things that I want to do, especially physical things. Should I be looking at doing those when I know that my health is okay? And also, I think with my life circumstances, my mum sadly was diagnosed with dementia in 2019. She's kind of at mid-stage of that now, but as an only child, I'm very mindful that I'm likely to be called upon more and more as her condition progresses. And so for various different reasons, working for myself as well, I decided, right, I can, if I'm careful and if I'm, sensible about it, I can probably manage the time that I need to be able to dedicate for the walk. I can manage the finances and everything else that goes alongside that, and do this walk. And it literally was just something that I'd heard about from a couple of fellow speakers, and I'd watched a film about it, and I thought I'd like to do that one day. And that one day became April 26th, if you like, the start day. What I think has been amazing more than anything is that I decided that I might as well make it a fundraiser. And so I thought, if I'm going to walk that kind of distance, then I might as well try and do some good from it. So I started raising funds for Dementia UK to actually support funding a dementia specialist care nurse in the local area where I live, and more importantly, my mum lives. And so I think what that did was on point for this podcast, really, is it enhanced the purpose. It gave me a reason to keep going. If the day got tough, and the walking conditions did get tough, on many occasions, it's hillier than you think in northern Spain. So, on those tougher days, and I was carrying over a stone in weight on my backpack, it was that purpose, I think, that kept me going. Well, I know that kept me going. And the lessons, I think, that you learn on the journey. I've been back now for almost 2 months, and I think they're only just really coming to the forefront of mind as to the importance of them, or the relevance of them, really, on the journey. It's been a really interesting walk. And I think it was that purpose of looking to raise those funds that kept me going, and also just that selfish purpose, not one like, I know in my business, my purpose is I want to make a difference for people and to help their businesses be more inclusive and all those kind of wonderful things. This was quite a selfish purpose, to be honest, which actually I don't see any shame in saying. But it was for me. It was for me to say I could do it, but it was also to do some good from it, for selfish reasons. But yeah, I think that's kind of why I decided to do it.
And it appears to me that this is not just a singular lesson, not just a series of lessons, but this is actually a gift that's going to be continuing for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I think you could be right, and I suppose it's one of those things that I won't really know until, and then sort of years down the line, I'll be like, oh, actually, that changed as a result of the Camino. I think one of the things that I've realised from the journey is that it's all right to say no more often, and dare I say, lighten the load. I posted about this quite recently on my social media and it started with how much weight is too much weight. And I talked about how I'd researched the extent of what I would be carrying in my backpack, because I knew that actually anything that went in that backpack here at my home was staying with me on my back for over 500 miles across Spain. Now, there were services, just in case anybody's listening that wants to do this, there are services where you can ship your bag on if you need to, but I wasn't intending to do that. So and how realizing at times, wow, especially if my mood felt a bit lower a particular day, the pack felt heavier, but actually small adjustments to how I carried the backpack, or even discarding one or two things that were in the backpack, changed how I felt about that load, and it made it more manageable. And so that was sort of a literal shift, but there was a metaphorical shift in there as well about the amount of worrying and anxiety that I had been experiencing, I think, because of my family situation prior to that journey, and how I decided, it's not within my sphere of control. I cannot change my mother's diagnosis. I can only change, it's an old term, I suppose, but I can only change how I respond to my mother's diagnosis. And so that in itself released a bit of weight. And I think since I've got back from that journey, I'm evaluating so much in my life, in my professional life, as well as my social life and personal life, to think about, what are the small adjustments that I can make to my life's backpack, if you like, that will make that load more manageable and ultimately the walk all the way forward more enjoyable. But it's been a very interesting kind of first step, but I think there will be many other things to come because there's so much I took from it and the people that I met.
And it's one of my favorite books is The Alchemist. And the main character is called Santiago, and he goes on a trek, a pilgrimage across to try and find his own personal treasure and his purpose in life. Now, it strikes me that there is a reason why Santiago is the name of the main character in the Alchemist, because this is the Camino de Santiago that you've just been on, and it being St. James, the patron saint of Spain. It seems to be really symbolic, and I'm sure there is. I will reflect on that in my reflections and actions separately. But what I'm hearing here about this evaluation that you've come to is that you've got a revised filter for life, that you're able to make decisions and choices a lot easier, and where things may have weighed you down before, they don't, because it's that decision making operation system that you've now got is so clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to sort of compartmentalize or put it into perspective here, it is a work in progress, Amy. I'd love to be able to say, I've come back and I've got rid of everything in my life that doesn't matter, and I'm just worrying not at all, and all those kind of things. It is a work in progress, but it is in progress, and that's the important thing. And I think so often we do get stuck in our lives, don't we? We almost know that something perhaps could change and life would improve, not just for ourselves, but for those who we touch in our lives, metaphorically so, in our personal lives and our businesses. But we're not quite sure what that is or how to go about it. And I think it's almost, when we think about our brains going into that alpha frequency and just almost daydreaming, a 500-mile walk, you do a lot of daydreaming, I can tell you. And so there's an element of creativity that comes from that. You become much more observant of the things around you in terms of the landscape, and it's sensory overload. It's so beautiful. But also you become much more introspective and creative about your own inner self, I think. And the things that I realized that I'm not quite sure what to do with them yet, but I found the whole thing extremely leveling for me as an individual, but leveling as a societal thing. And Amy, how passionate I am about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the world, and that we need more of that, basically. And this whole sense of belonging that, I think so much of society craves to achieve is so naturally present on a journey like the Camino de Santiago. I did the journey on my own, but I was rarely on my own, if that makes sense, because there are many, many different people. And I could be walking one day with somebody who has nothing, and I could be walking with somebody another day who's extremely wealthy and even famous. I could be walking with people who have had tragedy in their life, and that is the reason for the walk. There are other people who are walking for various other reasons. And here's the thing, until and only until and unless you build that kind of relationship with them, you don't know. You do not know who you're walking with, and they don't know who you are that they're walking with. There's an etiquette, if you like, on the Camino that you don't sort of say, morning, you know, why are you walking the Camino? Because it's such a personal thing for people. So it's only when you have the privilege to be let into somebody's life that you may uncover some more about them. And that, I think, is such a leveling experience. I don't know, I just keep thinking to myself, every leadership team or, you know, team in the land should go for walks together, because it's just such a leveling experience. Yeah, I don't know what that means and what that will mean for me, but I found it one of the most single magical experiences of the entire walk. The people that you meet and the experiences that they share.
And I find it slightly ironic that here you are on a podcast which is focused on why, talking about your why, and yet the etiquette of this particular walk was not to ask why. I love that. Right. But I do want to dig into this sense of belonging that we are craving to achieve, and knowing that fitting in is the opposite to belonging, and you're on this walk alongside other people, and you've clearly had an epiphany because you started thinking one thing, or this walk started with one thing, but it's ended with another or many others. And the way that you said that there is a way of being on this walk, did you find that come naturally to you? You didn't have to fit in. Did you belong?
Yeah. You know what? That's a really great question. So yeah, there were just no expectations, I think. You know, I'm a gay female, and you know, there's always been, even though I speak about my lived experience now for organizations, I do still, if people have listened to 129, they'll understand a little bit more. But, you know, there's always an element of just hesitation as I tell them, if that makes sense, or as it starts to come out in conversation. And I suppose this was no different an experience, because that's my own triggers, if that makes sense. However, I think the important thing there was that, and this is where I think there is a link into Focus on Why, is because there was that common purpose. And if that common purpose is just, let's get to Santiago, you know, then so be it. I found myself, I was an early bird, so I would enjoy waking early. I would usually be on the road between 6 and 6:30 a.m. starting to walk. And the reason for that was twofold. One, it was a little cooler, and it was quite warm, even at the time of year I was walking. So it was a little bit cooler. And two, because I just adore the sunrise. And the sunrises were magical. And what that meant was that a lot of the time I walked alone. Through choice, I walked alone. I mean, I traveled alone. But, you know, people say to you, oh, you know, you'll never be alone. You're always surrounded by other pilgrims and people that you keep meeting from town to town. And that is absolutely true. And in fact, I ended up with a circle of several friends on that journey that I think we will remain friends for life, because we've had that shared experience together. But I still enjoyed the solitude of just getting up, and all I could really hear, apart from the birds waking up, were my own feet on the gravel path. That, I think, was amazing. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that was something that I didn't expect to enjoy, because I'm quite extroverted. But I think it allowed my introverted side to come just to feel at ease in my own company with no expectations. This was one of the things that I loved about the Camino experience, that I wish so many other people in life, in the life that we live, the world that we live in right now, could experience the simplicity that the Camino brings. All you got to do is walk. Now, I do appreciate, of course, some people have physical limitations. So I'm not being flippant about it when I say all you've got to do is walk, but I mean, whether that's 1 kilometre or 25 or 30 kilometres, whatever your body wants to allow and your time allows for you. But I mean that there's nothing else infiltrating your world for the time that you are experiencing the Camino de Santiago. It's just an out of this world experience. I feel very lucky to have done it.
I can see, and I can really pick up on how it has shifted a lot of ways of reflection and ways of inner introspection. And what I want to just try and understand a little bit more is the observations of landscape, the impact of being in nature. And you've mentioned the sunsets, sunrises, and you've also mentioned the sound of the birds, the sound of your feet, and it being quite a sensory overload there. Whenever I read, particularly, I've got a daily philosophical calendar and a daily stoic, everything seems to be about moments of nature and how they impact us. And I think it links heavily again to what I was saying earlier about belonging and where we belong in this world. We tend to take ourselves away from the nature side of things. Often can be the case. And you've talked about being in touch with the weather, understanding the choices you're making because of the natural environment. So just share with me sort of the lessons that you've taken about being more at one with nature.
Yeah, I think, I live in the countryside at home, but it's very different just being in the countryside and walking. And nature doesn't ask you to be anything other than yourself, right? How can you not belong in this wonderful world we live in? Which is ironic, isn't it, in its own sense, I suppose, when we are so busy, as you mentioned there, trying to change some of ourselves or hide some of ourselves in order to somehow fit in. Nature doesn't expect that of you, and ultimately, I suppose there's, what do they say? There's no such thing as bad weather. It's only inappropriate clothing, right? So ultimately, the weather that you experience, as long as you're equipped for it in the right way, then you can handle anything that's thrown at you, right? And I think, again, therein lies a metaphor for life. If you're metaphorically dressed appropriately, you can deal with anything. And it's hard to put into words, Amy, that connection with nature, because it just means that you're just so very present. I am quite highly strung, I suppose some would say, and I find myself thinking, well, what's next in life, and whether that's for my own growth and development, whether that's for my business, whether that's for what's going to happen next in my family or my personal circumstances. I've found myself over the years, always looking for the next thing, because I think in many ways society makes us, doesn't it? It almost, dictates that in order to be quote unquote successful, or the best daughter or the best spouse or the best business person or whatever, you've got to be looking at evolving and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And nature says, hey, just show up as you are. That's all I need from you right now, and that's it. And it's a game changer. I'll give you a very quick story as well. So the Camino de Santiago is the sign of the Camino is the conch shell and a yellow arrow. So there are fundamentally all across Europe, in the UK as well, but all across Europe, there are yellow arrows and these shells, signs all across. And they guide you, right? So you can't get lost. And I did a little blog. It was mainly for my family, actually, while I was away. And I did this little video that said, can't get lost here because you've got all these signs guiding your way, etc. A little while later that same day, I mean, you couldn't write it, I got lost, right? And I lost the path. I couldn't see anyone around. I remember I did a lot of walking on my own. I actually did look behind me and I noticed there were a couple of people following me, neither of whom spoke the same language as me, and I didn't speak either of their languages. So that was quite comical in itself. But they were following me and I was just walking and hoping to walk away from the sun so that I knew I was traveling west. A long story short, I did find my way back to the path, and we all successfully, although we'd missed out a town, we got our way back to the main path. But I found myself thinking, was I lost or was I off track? And I think there's a distinction there that changes how you feel about the experience, right? I think if you feel lost, you go into a bit of panic mode. You feel like maybe I can't cope. Maybe I've done something wrong again, quote unquote. Whereas for me, when I thought back, it's like actually I knew that I needed to keep going west. I knew that I was safe. That's really important. There's so many lessons for life here in all of this. And I was just taking a different path. So I was just off the path. I wasn't off path. I was just off the path, or the way as it's known. And so I think that teaches me something, not just about me, but of how potentially I can work with the people that I work with as well. Because, are you lost? Is it wrong? Have you messed up, or are you just doing something differently? Are you not really lost? So there's those kind of things that nature and just being present in nature and thinking of nothing else, just walking, just brings to the forefront of one's mind and has stuck with me. Just those small things, just losing the sign. And I guess, when we don't have clear direction, sometimes we can go off track. There's another lesson. I won't go into that one, but they're everywhere, aren't they? They're all these lessons. If you're open to learning them, that's something else. And I think that's something that nature gives you, where you can just be who you are, as you are in nature. So much comes to you. And I just think it was just a magical thing. I'm throwing lots at you, aren't I, from this?
Honestly, yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. I'm thinking, right, am I lost or am I on track? What track do I take you on next? I feel there's so many different options here. The scallop shell that is the symbol with the yellow arrow is beautiful, actually. I just looked it up and had a look so I could see what you were referring to. And it's also supposed to symbolize courage, strength, and hope, which is lovely. I love that combination of the challenge that this has set you, the challenge that you took up to go on this particular route, and that sort of conversation that you were having about what's next and always looking for the next thing. I was just thinking as you were saying that, well, who's actually keeping count? Like, even I can't keep count on whether I'm in the present or doing the next thing. No one's actually even keeping count on anyone else, right? There's no way to know whether you are being judged for evolving, doing the next thing, or whether in the moment you're really appreciating what is there. And that, as you said, was a game changer, just understanding how to be present and also how to know that you being off track was okay and that you were safe. And so what I wanted to sort of really pick up on is, how are you measuring, or how are you how are you sort of now reflecting on where you are now, where you want to be, and what that gap is, if any?
Wow. Oh my God. I think, there's a part of me that's letting a lot of this still sit, and letting it just be. I have, so there's been a few things that I've changed that reasonably radical, I suppose. I've rethought, how I work, so that I've got some balance of free time, but I think by doing that will probably, if I'm honest, allow me to be more productive, bizarrely, by working less than sort of sat at my computer all day, every day. I don't like the term busy fool, but I recognize I have been that person from time to time. So I think less time, more quality would be better than more time, less quality. So that's one thing. So rethinking how I balance work and life, and like really balance it so that I really am working to live and not living to work. I've actually got rid of my car really recently as well. I do have a car still, but I've gotten rid of a very new car that was a bit all singing, all dancing, because I've always liked my cars, and realised that actually I don't need that car sitting on the drive, not going anywhere, because I'm travelling a lot less post-COVID with, and I can do my work. Much of my work can be done from here at home virtually. So why am I sort of spending money and focusing my efforts on something that isn't serving me, that I don't need and therefore isn't serving me? So there's been a few things already. And I suppose those are things that maybe your perspective just changes a little bit. And that's an initial sign of that perspective change. But I do think that I suppose one has to be a bit mindful of just those knee-jerk responses. So you go on what I never thought would be a life-changing walk, although many people said, "Oh, it'll change your life," and I said, my life's good. I don't need my life changing. But actually, bizarrely, there are some changes that, some of which I just mentioned there, that have already occurred. But I think you have to be mindful of coming back from something like that and say, right, okay, I'm sell the house, and I'll go and live in a tent somewhere on a remote island in the Pacific. It's all that becomes a bit dramatic. So there are things in life that I need to certainly stick around for right now, and wouldn't choose anything different. So it's just allowing the things that perhaps I have to be around for, and the things that I want to be doing more of, and just allowing those two things to sit together so that they're not in conflict with one another, but actually they just work very nicely and ripple with one another, and ebb and flow nicely. And I think that will be a good thing for my own energy levels and my own just inner psyche, to be honest. I think so.
It's really interesting that you spoke about having this balance between life and work. And I often speak about people having a lens of purpose instead of just looking at creating this work-life balance. Instead, aim to achieve a balance between purpose and enjoyment across all areas of your life. And that shift seems to be what's happened to you, is that, yes, you've made some shifts in the car and other perspectives, but it's now a case of how you lightening that load. It comes back to the metaphor of the rucksack again.
Yeah, I think it does. And you sometimes meet people who will say, they will profess to make your life better by saying, I'll help you manage your life and sort your life out and all these kind of things. And I don't dismiss those people, but I think sometimes what happens is that that's somebody else's way. So that has worked for them, but it may not be feel congruent for someone else. And and I think, because no one knows you like you know yourself, and no one feels what you feel, and so if we were talking about the heaviness of life, personal life, professional life, just life generally, and looking for, as you say there, that balance and of purpose and energy in all walks of our life, then it is only us that can, I guess, feel the weight of what it is we're carrying around. And therefore, we feel the lifting of that weight when we even just try and think, well, what might happen if, I could have said, well, I wonder what might happen if I just monitored each month how many miles I was driving in my car before I decided to get rid of it. There will be people that they like to see the evidence, they like to see the data, and so they want some kind of real way of measuring that's data driven, if you like, and that might be for any part of their life. For me, I'm a bit of a, I don't know, just kind of like feel it, and if it feels right, then I'm good with that. I'm a bigger picture kind of person, really, and so I just knew that actually it was pointless having the car I'd got for the amount of miles I was doing. But I think that point could be made across different elements of life and an individual's life. And I think that those are things that are still to come for me, Amy, on the back of this journey, to be honest. Just really seeing, okay, what weight can be lifted here, and also what weight gives me comfort. That might sound like a strange thing to say, but the first couple of times I went on long walks after returning from the Camino felt odd because I didn't have a pack on my back. Isn't that strange? Because I'd almost got used to, the pack on the back meant ready for walk. And it was almost like it wasn't an armor, but it was like the business suit that we would put on, but for walking. Really interesting. So yeah.
And I can imagine that if I sat down with a group of people, 10, 100, 1,000, everybody's experience would have been different. Everybody takes something different from this journey. And that's what's so special about it, is that you bring yourself present to this walk, and you come away from it still you, but a different version of.
Yeah, definitely. And that, I think, is one of the another magical part of this whole experience, really, is I mean, you've got to be yourself, everyone else is taken, we've all heard that little phrase, but being the best version of you, I think, and a version of you that at that moment in time serves you. I think we do all somewhere within us have a purpose. Now, some people know very clearly what that purpose is. For other people, their purpose has been fixed for a long time, for forever. For other people, their purpose maybe has shifted as they've gone through their life. And for some people, they struggle to really realize what that purpose is, I think, and these kind of experiences, I think, can really help individuals, but whether they come away knowing what their purpose is, knowing what their why is, and they have this big, I don't know, massive shift in life, or whether they just realize that things feel okay, or that things just feel that little bit better, or that little bit less stressful, or that little bit more manageable. That can also be enough. But to say, come out a different version of yourself to, I don't know, maybe just a more grounded version of yourself, at least for now, then great, I'll take it.
And you said that your purpose in business is very clear. You want to make a difference. And your purpose for yourself now, is it one and the same, or is it different?
That's a good question as well. I think That's something I'm also going to just let sit for a little while, I think, because yes, I think one of the things I talk about a lot in my work is small steps. Small steps can make a big difference. And funnily enough, I've just taken over about 1.5 million small steps, and it's made a big difference. Can I define that difference right now in a single sentence? Honestly, Amy, I probably can't. But it feels okay. And that's the important thing. So I think if I give myself permission to just not stress so much about I've got to have this sorted and that sorted, then bizarrely, life is sorted. Does that make sense? I don't know if it makes sense to you, or yeah, you're smiling a little bit at the other end there, but it just almost feels a little bit like just roll with it for a little while. Maybe that's the purpose, maybe that's it. Just roll with it.
I think it comes back to what you were sharing earlier about control, about understanding what you are able to and what you're not able to. And so when you say life is sorted, life and the world and the universe understands that. And it's up to us to take that on board, that learning as well.
Yeah, I guess so, and I suppose a bit like in the same way I felt whilst walking, where no two bits of landscape were the same. You never knew what was over the next hill. I remember entering a part of the Camino called the Meseta, and it's where basically mountainous areas and the Rioja region sort of disappears behind you, and you go into this sort of quite barren plains, if you like, a very flat area of northern Spain. And literally, I got to the top of this hill and I looked over the precipice, and there were just these flat plains, beautiful sort of beige and cream and different shades of green, the fields, really angular, just as far as the eye could see. And that was an example of, I had no idea that was just going to be over that hill. And maybe it's expect nothing, prepare for everything kind of moment, and I suppose it does always comes back to, if you yourself feel in a good place with life, then you are much more open to the things that life throws at you and much more equipped to deal with what comes your way, I suppose. And be that challenges, be that opportunities, be that everything in between. I think these kinds of lessons are valuable and invaluable, I think, for life's journey. And yeah, I don't know where I go from here. It's just one of those things that I will just see what happens on the top of the next hill of life, really, what's over the other side of that. But I feel ready to deal with it. So it's a good feeling.
It sounds like you've also got some real clarity around boundaries that you're drawing for yourself and for others, and who's part of your world, who's not part of your world. Literally just understanding. Again, it comes back to that belonging, knowing where you belong, what belongs around you, and having that clear mark.
Yeah, definitely. I think, when you find yourself away from those you love the most for a period of time, despite the fact I chose to do this, it was hard. I obviously, missed my wife, Shah. I missed my mum and dad and my family. It helps you put things into perspective, and as you rightly say, Amy, it helps you really realize not only what matters but what doesn't. And I think there's as much of that has come from this journey as anything else. And that feels, those boundaries, I felt very proud of myself even earlier today on a call with somebody who was inviting me to get involved with something. And I just thought, that's going to take up some of my time, that I can be focusing that energy and attention elsewhere. And I very graciously declined. And I felt super proud of myself for doing that, because, it can be hard to say no to people. But yeah, you're right. Those boundaries are there. And I think if I can keep those boundaries strong, and it's that whole kind of, when you become more aware of these things, you even unconsciously, actually, I think, they keep coming back for you and serving you on that journey. And I think boundaries like that will serve me well.
I love that. There's something has come into mind, which is the work of Viktor Frankl. I'm doing a lot of work writing my book about purpose at the moment. And Viktor Frankl, who is the author of Man's Search for Meaning, identified that purpose and meaning can be found in 4 key areas in life. And one is in creating a work or doing a deed, or by experiencing goodness, truth, or beauty. Another one is by experiencing nature, works of art or culture. Another one is loving someone. And the other one is in the stand that you take, in how you adapt to and react to unavoidable limits on life possibilities. Now, the walk seems to have encompassed almost all of those elements. And so it's so purposeful and meaningful, which I think is why a pilgrimage in itself is just such a powerful thing to do, because you are out experiencing nature, you are doing a deed, you are loving someone, or which could be yourself on this journey, and in the stand you take in what you do and what you stand for and what you stand against. And so, wow, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and I have read that book as well. In fact, on the back of your talking about it on one of your many podcast episodes, Amy. But I don't remember the messages as well as you do. But yeah, you're absolutely right. In terms of how all of that seems to have been encompassed in the walk. And I think so much of that comes from that balance of time spent alone and time spent with others. We are social animals at the end of the day, and there were times where, although these people I'd met them as strangers, of course, we were all strangers to one another, in an experience like that that's outside of your daily life, you can become quite close to people quite quickly, and then miss them when they're not around, which is so interesting because you've only known them 5 minutes, but yeah, that real blend of perhaps being around the right people at the right time in your life, and that equal balance of being comfortable in your own company. By the way, I will say I had absolutely no expectation from this walk. It was just a walk. I just wanted to prove I could do it, I suppose, and it's one of those things that until you've done it, you don't know if you can do it, which is also probably something that resonates with people in other parts of their life. Yeah, but yeah, I had no expectation, and yet all of these things, that we've just been talking about, and I'm very, very sure that there will be more to come. But yeah, a very powerful experience, and one that, if there is anybody listening that thinks or has been thinking about doing something like this, I highly recommend it. It's not a race. You can take whatever time you need. You can even just walk a portion of it, if you don't fancy walking 500 miles. And there are Camino routes all over Europe, so you don't have to do the same route that I did. There are various different routes of various different lengths in various different locations, but an experience like this one is amazing, and I really think it's good for body and mind, and I think I'll be very, very grateful to its lessons for a long time to come yet.
And will you take anyone with you next time you go?
Which is really interesting, isn't it? Would, you know, lots of people have said, would you do it again? And I said, in a heartbeat, I would do it again. But for the fact I wouldn't leave people for this length of time again. I am planning to do another one, Amy. I'm planning to do another route into Santiago called the Camino Invierno. So I did the Camino Francés last time, and this would be the Camino Invierno, which is around about 200 miles. So around about 2 weeks of walking. So I'm planning to do that, all being well, into next year. But the Camino is a very personal journey. And for some people, absolutely, they do it with friends or they do it with a partner or a family member. And that is absolutely their prerogative. If I were to do it again with every experience would be different. But if I was doing it with someone else, no matter who that person was to me, it would change the whole experience. And there is nothing wrong with that, because I'm sure that experience would be as wonderful, but it would be just different. And I think I loved it sounds quite selfish, but I loved the selfishness of it, actually, that it was something that I could do by myself and for myself. And that gave me something very, very precious. Yeah.
And is there a danger that you're trying to replicate an experience by repeating it, knowing that you had no expectations going into it the first time? Now it's hard not to understand what the outcomes are going to be.
Yeah, that is true. And yes, it could be. For me, actually, I one of the things I have mentioned it, but is the landscape. It's absolutely beautiful, northern Spain, and you actually pass through, I think it's about 7 provinces, and where Santiago de Compostela sits is in Galicia, which is quite green because it is actually often rainier, sort of a microclimate within there. But it does add to its beauty. It's quite spectacular when you go over the Cantabrian mountains and into Galicia. It's very, very beautiful. So the route that I was thinking of taking actually just gives me more of the Galician countryside, but from a different angle. So it's actually for that reason, it is literally just because I want to do another walk. But I know that if I go to Spain and do a walk for 2 weeks, or even to Portugal or wherever, that would mean I'd focus much more on the walk than if I just went to my local forest like I do every day with the dog. Does that make sense? So I don't think I wouldn't want to try and compete with the experience I had on the Camino Francés, because I don't think there would ever be a comparison. It's a great question though, and but yeah, it's actually just selfishly to go back and enjoy some more of the Spanish countryside because I loved it.
Well, you've certainly encouraged me to think about doing this, and it sounds wonderful, and I can understand why the attraction is so high for so many people, why people would do it and take on their own personal journey with themselves. It sounds like an incredible experience. Jackie, I just want to say thank you for highlighting this as a particular topic, for coming back on the show, for really sharing this magical experience that you've been on. It really has been incredible. How would people get in touch with you? You've clearly got lots to share with the world. So what's the best way for them to reach out?
Well, I thank you once again for having me back on, Amy. And yeah, I hope it has inspired other people, yourself and maybe other people, to consider doing something like this too. I can be reached. I'm JackieHandy.com is my website. Jackie Handy, you'll find me on LinkedIn, where I generally hang out business-wise. And I know that you'll put my stuff in the show notes as you do. But if anybody wants to talk about inclusive leadership and maybe the role that this kind of activity could have in supporting that in your business, or even you just want to have a chat about maybe doing the Camino de Santiago, honestly, I'd be very happy to talk to people. add my contact stuff in the notes, Amy, and people can get in touch. But thank you once again.
It will all go in the show notes. So thank you. Jackie, do you have some final words to share? I know it's been incredible and there's been so much already shared, but then is there something in particular that you just like to highlight?
You know me well, and you know how much I can talk. So I'm just going to say something really simple that's known by people already, but I think fits this moment. And that is switch off and switch on again. It works for computers and it works for life. Try it.
How has this conversation had an impact on you? What value have you received from tuning in? What are your reflections with actions? Please take a moment to leave me an Apple Podcast or Spotify review sharing how Focus on Why has made a difference to you today. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. To keep it going, simply connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, or join the Focus on Why Facebook group. All the links are in the show notes. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.